You think mental strength is motivation. That's why you're weak. You think it's a feeling, a mood, some cinematic moment where you finally lock in. That fantasy is keeping you average. Mental strength isn't born in intensity. It's forged in repetition. Cold, boring, ruthless repetition. And if that truth offends you, good, because offense is the first sign your ego is cracking. Here's the shock. Your mind doesn't respect what you do once. It only bows to what you repeat. You can scream about discipline, post quotes, talk big. None of it matters. The brain is a machine, not a priest. It only believes patterns. If your actions aren't repetitive, your identity isn't real. You don't become strong. You prove it daily until weakness has nowhere left to hide. Most men run from repetition because repetition exposes frauds. Anyone can push hard once. Anyone can be intense for a week. Repetition is where excuses die. It's where boredom shows you who you really are. And most of you quit right there because boredom terrifies you more than failure. That's why you stay the same. Now let's talk about speaking in tongues, not the religious nonsense. I'm talking about the internal language of power, the self-talk forged through repetition. When you repeat actions long enough, your mind starts speaking differently, not emotionally, not politely. It becomes sharp, commanding, automatic. That's the tongue of dominance. You don't think discipline, you are discipline. Your nervous system understands the rules. No debate, no hesitation. Repetition rewires your internal voice. Weak men negotiate with themselves. Strong men issue commands. That shift doesn't come from inspiration, it comes from doing the same hard thing so many times that resistance shuts up. That's when identity changes. You stop trying to be strong, you recognize yourself as strong. And recognition is power. Discipline isn't self-control. Discipline is self-ownership. Repetition is how you claim it. Every repeated action is a vote for the man you're becoming. Skip days and you dilute authority. Stack days and your presence changes. Your posture changes. Your decisions get faster, cleaner. You stop explaining yourself. High-status men don't explain, they execute. Mental strength is not something you stumble upon in a moment of inspiration. It is constructed, brick by brick, through repeated action under pressure. Anyone telling you otherwise is selling fantasy to keep you comfortable. If strength came from realization, everyone would have it by now. The truth is harsher. Mental strength only respects proof. And proof is repetition. Not when you feel ready. Not when conditions are perfect. Every day, especially when you don't feel like it. Most men confuse intensity with strength. They go all in for a day, maybe a week, then disappear. They call that effort. It isn't. It's emotional impulse. Your mind doesn't trust emotional impulse. It waits for consistency. Until then, it treats your confidence like a lie. That's why pressure breaks you. That's why stress exposes you, because your mind knows you haven't earned authority over yourself. Repetition is how you earn that authority. The brain is ruthless and mechanical. It doesn't care what you say you are. It only records what you do repeatedly. If your actions are inconsistent, your self-belief is imaginary. You can talk about discipline all you want, but the moment resistance shows up, you fold, because your mind has no evidence that you're serious. Confidence without repetition is just noise. This is where most people get uncomfortable. Repetition is boring. It's lonely. It doesn't give you dopamine. And that's exactly why it works. Repetition strips away excitement and exposes intent. When there's no hype left, no audience, no motivation, what remains is character, or the lack of it. Most men don't quit because things are hard. They quit because things stop feeling special. And the moment something stops feeling special, their ego loses interest. Mental strength grows when you act without emotional reward, when you train without being seen, when you execute without applause, when you show up even though nothing inside you wants to. That's when the mind starts to change its tone toward you. It stops questioning your decisions. It stops pushing back. It starts following orders. Not because you feel strong, but because you've proven reliability. Every repeated action is a signal. Skip once and the signal weakens. Skip often and the signal collapses. Stack days and something shifts. Your internal dialogue sharpens. Hesitation fades. You don't argue with yourself as much. You don't need to convince yourself. You already know the outcome because you've lived it repeatedly. That certainty is what people mistake for confidence. It's not confidence. It's familiarity with discipline. Weakness thrives in inconsistency. It hides behind excuses, moods, and timing. Repetition hunts it down. When you repeat hard actions daily, excuses run out. There's nowhere left to hide. You stop asking how you feel and start asking what must be done. That shift alone separates leaders from followers, dominant men from reactive ones. Mental strength is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's quiet and grounded. It comes from knowing, not hoping, from having a history with yourself that you can't deny. When you've repeated the same discipline long enough, fear loses leverage. Doubt has no evidence to argue with. Stress becomes familiar terrain, not a threat. If your strength disappears when life applies pressure, it was never strength. It was momentum. Real strength stays when motivation dies. And the only thing that survives motivation is repetition. That's the difference between men who talk about control and men who actually have it. Your mind is not inspired by words, promises, or emotional speeches. It is conditioned by patterns. That's the reality most people avoid because it removes their favorite excuse, hope. Hope feels productive, but it produces nothing. Patterns produce results. If your life sucks at people, it's because your patterns are unstable. The mind does not respond to what you intend. It responds to what you repeat. Most men believe one strong decision changes everything. It doesn't. One decision without follow-through is meaningless. The brain treats it as noise. You can wake up motivated, disciplined, focused, and aggressive for a day, and it will not matter. By tomorrow, your mind will be waiting again, watching to see if you are consistent or just emotional. Until a pattern forms, the mind assumes you are lying. This is why confidence collapses under pressure. When stress hits, the brain looks for familiar behavior. If discipline isn't familiar, it disappears. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your patterns. That's not philosophy. That's how conditioning works. Your nervous system chooses what it knows, not what you wish for. Patterns remove decision-making. That's where power begins. When something becomes patterned, it no longer requires motivation. You don't debate it, you execute it. Weak men argue with themselves daily because nothing in their life is automated. Every action requires emotional energy. That's exhausting, and exhaustion leads to collapse. Strong men build patterns so strict that emotion becomes irrelevant. Your mind is skeptical by design. It questions new behavior. It resists change. It pushes back with discomfort and doubt. But it also submits when it sees repetition. Do something once, and the mind challenges you. Do it twice, and it observes. Do it daily, and it starts adjusting. Do it long enough, and resistance fades. The mind doesn't fight what it accepts as normal. This is where identity is formed, not through affirmations, not through self-talk, through patterns that force alignment. If you act disciplined repeatedly, your mind labels you disciplined. If you avoid discomfort repeatedly, your mind labels you weak. Labels shape behavior. Behavior reinforces labels. That loop is either building you or destroying you every single day. Most people live in chaos because their patterns are chaotic. Sleep times change. Work intensity changes. Standards change. And they wonder why their mental state feels unstable. Stability doesn't come from peace. It comes from structure. The mind relaxes when it knows what's coming. Predictable discipline creates internal calm, even in external chaos. When patterns are strong, pressure stops being overwhelming. Stress becomes another repeated condition. The body adapts. The mind sharpens. You stop reacting emotionally because your system already knows how to operate under load. That's mental toughness, not the absence of fear, but the presence of structure when fear appears. Every time you break a pattern, you teach your mind that rules are optional. Every time you maintain one, you reinforce authority. Authority over self is the highest form of power, and it's never given. It's earned through repetition so consistent that your mind starts questioning your leadership. The harsh truth is simple. If your life feels out of control, your patterns are weak. If your confidence feels fragile, your patterns are inconsistent. Fix the pattern, and the mind follows. Ignore it, and no amount of motivation will save you. Excuses survive in chaos. They thrive when effort is optional, when discipline is negotiable, when discomfort can be postponed. Repetition destroys that environment. It creates a controlled space where excuses are exposed, stripped, and eliminated. The moment you repeat the same demanding action every day, your usual justifications lose oxygen. There's no room for them to breathe. Most people don't realize this because they think excuses disappear when motivation appears. Wrong. Motivation hides excuses temporarily. Repetition hunts them down, permanently. When you commit to doing something difficult again and again, your mind runs out of creative ways to avoid it. At first, the excuses sound reasonable. You're tired. You're busy. Timing isn't right. But repetition doesn't care about reasons and only asks one question. Did you do it again today? That's when discomfort shows up. Not physical discomfort, psychological discomfort, the boredom, the monotony, the lack of novelty. This is where most men break. Not because the task is too hard, but because it's no longer exciting. The brain wants stimulation. Repetition denies it. And when stimulation disappears, weakness surfaces. Boredom is the real test. Pain is easy to respect. Fear is obvious. Boredom is subtle and dangerous. It whispers that this doesn't matter, that skipping once won't hurt, that consistency is overrated. That whisper has ended more ambitions than failure ever has. Repetition forces you to confront that voice daily, and every time you act anyway, that voice gets quieter. Excuses are nothing more than negotiations with weakness. Repetition removes negotiation. There's no discussion when the task is already decided. When action becomes routine, excuses have nowhere to attach. You're no longer asking if you should do it. You're just doing what's already scheduled. That's why repetition feels oppressive to weak minds. It removes their favorite escape routes. Most people like to believe they quit because life got hard. That's a lie. They quit because life got repetitive. The glamour wore off. The emotional reward disappeared. And without reward, their commitment collapsed. Repetition exposes whether you are ever serious or just entertained by the idea of change. When you repeat something daily, your flaws become visible. You see your lack of focus, your impatience, your inconsistency. Repetition acts like a mirror that doesn't flatter, and most people don't like what they see. Instead of correcting it, they walk away. They call it burnout, loss of passion, or needing a break. It's none of those. It's avoidance. Repetition forces accountability without mercy. You can't blame circumstances when the same task shows up every day. You can't hide behind potential when performance is measured repeatedly. Over time, excuses sound ridiculous even to yourself. You start hearing them for what they are: weak attempts to protect comfort. This is where mental toughness is forged. Not in moments of crisis, but in moments of repetition when quitting would be easy and invisible. Nobody would know. No one would judge you, except you. And repetition sharpens that internal standard. You begin to feel the weight of broken promises immediately. Skipping doesn't feel neutral anymore. It feels like loss of control. Once excuses are gone, clarity appears. You stop lying to yourself. You stop pretending conditions need to be perfect. You accept reality as it is and act within it. That acceptance is power. Not optimism, not belief. Power rooted in execution. Repetition doesn't just remove excuses, it replaces them with responsibility. You stop asking why something is hard and start asking why you aren't stronger yet. That question changes behavior, and behavior, repeated long enough, changes who you are. The voice in your head is not who you are, it's who you've trained it to be. Most men don't understand this, which is why they live their entire lives negotiating with themselves like weak subordinates. They wake up arguing, they hesitate, they delay, they need permission from their emotions to act. That inner chaos isn't personality, it's a lack of repetition. At the beginning, the internal voice is loud, emotional, dramatic. It complains, it questions, it searches for comfort. That's the default setting of an untrained mind. When action is inconsistent, the mind believes it has equal authority. It thinks it can debate commands. It thinks it gets a vote. And if you let that continue, you will never be in control of yourself. Repetition changes the power dynamic. Slowly at first, then decisively. When you perform the same discipline action again and again, the mind starts noticing something dangerous. It doesn't get to stop you. You act whether it agrees or not. That's when the tone shifts. The emotional chatter weakens. The explanations shorten. The resistance becomes predictable, then irrelevant. Most people think self-talk changes through positivity or belief. That's delusion. Self-talk changes through obedience. When the mind sees that its protests don't alter behavior, it adapts. It stops wasting energy. It stops creating drama. It learns the rules. And once the rules are learned, the voice becomes sharper, quieter, more direct. This is where command replaces conversation. You no longer ask yourself if you should do the work. You tell yourself to do it. And more importantly, you follow through. That follow through is what trains the voice. Authority is never claimed verbally. It's enforced through action. Men who lack repetition live in constant internal debate. Every decision feels heavy. Every task feels optional. They burn mental energy before they even start. That exhaustion isn't from effort. It's from indecision. Repetition eliminates that. When action is habitual, the mind stops arguing. There's nothing to argue about. The order has already been given and proven. Over time, this creates a dangerous advantage. Your internal voice stops protecting comfort and starts enforcing standards. It becomes intolerant of weakness. It calls out delay instantly, not emotionally, but cleanly, directly. That's when you know control has shifted. The mind is no longer the master. It's the weapon. This transformation doesn't feel dramatic. There's no moment of revelation. It feels mechanical, automatic. You notice you move faster. You recover quicker. You don't spiral under pressure. When stress hits, the voice doesn't panic. It gives instructions. That's dominance. Calm execution under load. Most men never experience this because they quit too early. They retreat at the phase where resistance is still loud. They mistake that noise for truth. It's not truth, it's the sound of authority being challenged. And if you back down at that moment, you teach your mind that rebellion works. Repetition teaches the opposite lesson. It teaches submission, not weakness order. The mind learns that discipline is non-negotiable. Once that lesson is learned, life gets quieter, cleaner. You stop overthinking because there's nothing left to think about. The decision has already been made by your past behavior. This is why men with real discipline seem unbothered. It's not confidence, it's conditioning. Their inner voice has been trained through repetition to support action, not sabotage it. And once you reach that point, you're no longer fighting yourself. You're directing yourself. And that changes everything. Most men think strength is something you perform, an act you put on when it's convenient, a posture you switch into when people are watching. That's why it never lasts, because performance collapses the moment pressure arrives. Identity doesn't. And identity is not chosen. It's installed through repetition. You don't become strong by acting strong once. You become strong when strength becomes your default setting, when your behavior no longer changes based on mood, audience, or circumstance. That shift doesn't come from intention. It comes from repetition so consistent that your nervous system stops seeing alternatives. At the start, discipline feels forced. You're pushing against resistance. You're reminding yourself who you want to be. That phase exposes the truth. You're not that person yet. You're borrowing the identity temporarily. Repetition is what makes it permanent. Every time you repeat the same hard behavior, you reinforce a signal. This is who I am now. Identity is nothing more than memory plus evidence. Your mind looks backward to decide who you are. If it sees scattered effort, it labels you inconsistent. If it sees repetition, it labels you reliable. That label changes everything. Once the mind accepts a label, it protects it. It acts in alignment with it. That's when discipline stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like obligation. This is where most people sabotage themselves. They want the identity without the evidence. They want to feel strong before they act strong. But the mind doesn't work that way. It waits for proof. Until then, it treats your self-image as fiction. That's why your confidence feels fragile. It hasn't been earned. Repetition removes that fragility. When you've shown up the same way hundreds of times, doubt has no leverage. You don't need reassurance. You don't need hype. You've seen yourself execute under boredom, stress, fatigue. That history becomes unshakable. You trust yourself because you've tested yourself repeatedly. This is also why strong men don't need motivation. Their identity carries them. They don't ask how they feel. They ask what aligns with who they are. And when identity is clear, decisions are fast, clean, brutal. There's no internal negotiation because the standard is already defined. Most men live in a gap between who they say they are and how they behave. That gap creates anxiety, frustration, self-doubt. Repetition closes that gap. When words and actions match consistently, the mind relaxes. There's no internal conflict. You stop pretending. You stop performing. You just execute. Identity through repetition also changes how others respond to you. Not because you demand respect, but because consistency is visible. People feel it. They trust it. You move differently. You speak less. You don't over-explain. That presence isn't charisma. It's coherence. Your internal and external worlds are aligned. Weak identities require constant reinforcement, validation, approval. Strong identities don't. They're self-sustaining. Built on repeated proof. That's why criticism doesn't shake them, why chaos doesn't destabilize them, why pressure sharpens instead of breaking them. If you're still trying to act disciplined, you're not there yet. Acting means you can stop. Identity means stopping feels unnatural. Repetition is the bridge between those two states. Cross it long enough, and there's no going back. You don't rise into identity. You sink into it through repetition, slowly, relentlessly, until the man you used to be no longer fits the way you live. Talent is loud. It announces itself early. It demands attention. It creates excitement. And then, more often than not, it disappears. The world is full of talented men who never became anything because talent without repetition is unstable. It spikes once, then collapses. Repetition doesn't spike. It compounds. Quietly, relentlessly, and compounding always beats explosions. Talent loves comfort. It expects reward for minimal effort. It assumes ability should be enough. That assumption is lethal. The moment talent meets resistance, real resistance, it starts negotiating. It starts asking why things aren't easier, why progress is slow, why recognition isn't immediate. Repetition doesn't ask those questions. It doesn't care about recognition. It cares about execution. This is why talented men often fail under pressure. They've never built the habit of showing up when conditions are bad. They rely on momentum. When momentum dies, so do they. Repetition creates something far more dangerous than momentum: inevitability. When you repeat the same disciplined action long enough, results stop being a possibility and start being a certainty. The world doesn't reward potential, it rewards output. And output is the result of repeated behavior, not raw ability. Talent might give you a head start, but repetition decides the finish. Every arena is filled with people who started fast and faded. Very few stay. The ones who do aren't the most gifted. They're the most consistent. Repetition builds a reputation you don't need to defend. People stop questioning you because your pattern answers for you. You don't need to explain your confidence because it's visible in your work. A silent dominance, no speeches, no self-promotion, just results stacked so consistently that doubt looks stupid. There's a reason repetition feels unglamorous. If it felt exciting, everyone would do it. Repetition requires you to accept being unseen, to work without praise, to improve without applause. Most men can't tolerate that. They want acknowledgement before they've earned authority. Repetition flips that equation. Authority comes first. Recognition comes later if it comes at all. This is where replacement happens. In every field, in every hierarchy, men are quietly removed not by competition, but by consistency. Someone else shows up every day. Someone else executes without complaint. Someone else improves while you wait for motivation to return. And one day, you're no longer needed, not because you weren't talented, because you weren't reliable. Repetition creates pressure tolerance. When you've done something thousands of times, stress loses its impact. The task is familiar. The discomfort is familiar. Your response is already programmed. That's why consistent men stay calm when others panic. They're not braver, they're conditioned. Talent reacts, repetition responds. Reaction is emotional, response is controlled. Control is power. When things go wrong, talent gets frustrated. Repetition adjusts. That ability to adjust without drama is what keeps you in the game while others burn out. The most dangerous enemy. Drive you forward at full steps at mediocrity. It's the one who would be counted on. The one who doesn't disappear. The one who doesn't need to be reminded. The one whose output is boringly consistent. That man becomes unavoidable. Systems adapt around him. Opportunities move toward him, not because he demands them, but because removing him would cause failure. Repetition also removes desperation. You don't chase wins when you know they're coming. You don't rush. You don't cut corners. You trust the process because you've tested it. That calm certainty unsettles people who rely on hype and emotion. They sense the difference immediately. Talent shines once. Repetition builds empires. One gets applause, the other gets control. And in the real world, control is the only thing that lasts. Here's the truth nobody wants to hear. Talent is loud once. Repetition is quiet forever. The world bows to the quiet man who shows up relentlessly. That's dominance, not hype, not noise. Control. Absolute control over your habits, your mind, your impulses. And if you don't have that, you don't have power no matter how confident you pretend to be. So understand this and don't forget it. Mental strength doesn't come from desire. It comes from repetition so ruthless it silences doubt. You either build that loop and become undeniable, or you keep chasing feelings and stay replaceable. There is no third option. Choose accordingly.